All right. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Thank you. My name is Lauren Alger. I'm the Director of Sustainable Design at STV and also the Chair of ASCE Infrastructure 2050, working to reduce embodied carbon in infrastructure systems. And today I'm joined by this incredible group of panelists here. We have Thomas Abdallah, the MTA. He's the Vice President of Design Services. We also have Miriam Voss, Sustainable Design Specialist at the Port Authority in New York and New Jersey. And we have Richard Jones, DDC, New York City Department of Design and Construction, and the Chief Engineer. So thank you all so much for being here. So today we're gonna really focus on embodied carbon and infrastructure systems, working to understand challenges that have been experienced when implementing reduction strategies and also ways to overcome them, whether that's at the agency level or maybe even at the industry level, how we can move forward. So what is embodied carbon? When you think about construction materials, when you're thinking about producing them, installing them, maintaining them, repairing them, and at the end of their life, demolishing them in some way, emissions are accounted for across that entire life cycle. So really understanding the emissions generated across that is so important. So there's 4 primary construction materials we can think about today, thinking about cement, iron, steel, and aluminum. These 4 materials account for 15% of global carbon emissions annually. That's the embodied carbon footprint of those 4 materials. It's a huge emitter. And so we're really gonna work to explore some strategies here. So I would like to hand this over to Tom, and hopefully we can learn a little bit more about embodied carbon reduction strategies at the MT and maybe a specific project.
All right, thank you very much. Just picking up on previous colleagues, I'm with the MTA Construction and Development, which, as Dana and Jamie had mentioned, is kind of all of the design and construction for the New York City Transit, Metro North, Bridges and Tunnels, Long Island Railroad, now all combined into one agency. In addition, I am also the Chief Environmental Engineer. I was the Chief Environmental Engineer for New York City Transit since 2004. And when they brought me over to the MTA C&D, I continued in that role. So I'm going to talk about what happened 14 months ago. Got an email that the governor was signing an Executive Order 22, which included mandated reporting requirements for all materials. And reading through the executive order, we come to understand that the first thing you need to do is understand who the players are, who's working at the regulatory level. As the Chief Environmental Engineer, who loves sustainability, but my first role is foremost compliance. So we have to comply. Executive orders have the weight of law. So we contacted the New York State Office of General Services, NYSERDA, and we began to, one lesson learned, I think if you want to hit this, the ground running, volunteer to be in their working group so you get as much information as possible for yourself. So we did that. And again, it's the many materials that you talked about, well, we concentrated on concrete first and foremost. So as a sustainability champion, what I wanted to do first and foremost was, what's our baseline? How much concrete do we use? So we actually created a Google form, and we worked with our business units and hundreds of projects, and we actually asked them all to provide information on how much concrete we use for year 2022. And that was kind of at the beginning of middle part of 2023, and said, oh, you'll never get that information. Well, we did. And we actually found out that we have at minimum, because I'm sure there's a reporting, some project that didn't report. I mean, it's not their fault, but everybody's busy. But we use over 45,000 tons of concrete. And then the other, in 2022, over 45,000 tons. Now, that sounds like a lot. I'm assuming, we're up there with the Port Authority and the DDC and the DOT as far as that level of usage of concrete. So we had to create a baseline. Another thing we found out was a very important requirement of Executive Order 22 was the environmental product declaration. It's kind of like an SDS for for a material. And that's another requirement of Executive Order 222 that's going to be coming soon. We found out that we had very few materials that had that. So working with the industry, collecting our baseline data, and then judiciously copying from people who are doing this way before we did, and learning about that. So I'll hand it over to Port Authority and EDC right now, but I will come back with that project a little bit later.
Yeah, and that's a great transition. I mean, really focusing on setting your baseline. How much of these materials are you using? Being able to understand that and then make an effective reduction is key. And Miriam, I know there's been so much progressive work at the Port Authority. Would love to hear maybe about some of your efforts with concrete and steel, material reuse, and also maybe some tools that have been really helpful.
So my team in Resilience and Sustainable Design Unit within engineering had an early start thinking about embodied carbon. Back in 2017, the Bayonne Bridge Raise the Roadway project came through our group, and we were looking to do an Envision verification. So we wanted to quantify what the environmental impact was of the material reuse. So we had to do a life cycle assessment. When we looked in the marketplace, we didn't find many tools that could meet our needs to do this, so we had to understand what a life cycle assessment is and to quantify the materials and the environmental impact and perform the assessment. This was challenging because it required documenting what the value is of the historic structure. So for this project, the foundations were maintained as well as the archway, but the roadway itself was raised to allow for Panamax ships to pass underneath. And so we did an assessment and we documented a 40% reduction in embodied carbon that documented a superior level of achievement in the Envision reduced net embodied carbon credit. This went to support an Envision Silver verification for the project. So this was a great project, not only for the salvaging the historic structure and the reduction in construction impacts, but also for the environmental impact of saving these materials. This got us thinking about material reuse. And so we started looking at how we could share materials between projects. We developed a sustainable construction reuse application, which we call SCRAP. We think of it as material dating. So the material that is demolished on a project, specifically concrete and asphalt, we're looking for opportunities to reuse it on other construction projects. And so we have this application that helps us share material between projects when we can find the right opportunities, schedule allowing. And then another aspect that we have been a leader in is for our concrete specification. So we have put global warming potential limits in the specification, and these limit the amount of embodied carbon allowed per unit of concrete, so per the volume. And so with this, we did outreach to the manufacturers to make sure that they could meet this reduction in embodied carbon, and we were able to make sure that there wouldn't be a cost increase from putting these global warming potential limits into our specification. And now we can assure that we have low carbon concrete being installed in our future construction projects.
You touched on a really great point about considering costs, how you can implement these global warming potential targets and not increase your costs, how you can implement strategies that do work. And that's a really great point. So thank you so much, Miriam. And with that, Rich, I would love to hear more about maybe the repair and rehabilitation strategies and also maybe a holistic approach of, how we should start approaching this.
Yeah, DDC is an interesting agency because we don't own anything. We are an owner that doesn't own anything. So we build stuff for other city agencies, whether that be libraries or streets or sewers or whatever. So we are trying to be more holistic with our planning and our capital management to help our sponsor agencies. How do we best meet your needs with both the lowest cost and therefore usually better sustainable projects? Do you need a new library building or can we just rehab what's there, right? Do we need to put in new sewers and water mains or can we line them? How do we do more trenchless technologies to do all of that, because at the end of the day, we're builders, but the greenest thing we can do is not build something, right? It's counterintuitive, but it's true, right? So thinking about that, and then when we do build stuff, we are working with the New York City Mayor's Office of Environmental Justice. We have an executive order similar to the state one where we're implementing EPDs for concrete and steel, and we'll be doing asphalt next year to try and figure out where we're at, because we also don't know how much concrete we use. We could calculate it, but we've never had to. So now we got to figure it out. And then working with our other agencies, like the MOECJ, that has a clean soil bank to allow matchmaking of soil products from fill to borrow, and anybody in the city can participate in that. So we support that, and we make that a requirement in our contracts that they at least coordinate with the Clean Soil Bank to try and maximize those gains. And then continuing to work with other agencies to do like recycled concrete aggregate and those other sorts of things to get more sustainable materials.
Yeah, that's so important, is how we can reuse materials. And with that, we do have some remaining time. So if anyone wants to speak about anything beyond, maybe a project example, Tom, or...
Yeah, so there are quite a few challenges here. And, one of those is that reporting that I mentioned. We actually use sort of a Google form for reporting, but there's also now a requirement in the executive order for state is the EC3. It's a software that a contractor will be able to just report the data. It will go to the MTA, and then it'll go right to the Office of General Services. One thing that was really interesting is as we were going through the projects, hundreds of projects, there was actually one project that was actually doing this already, which was warmed my heart, project organically being sustainable without having to be told. So we found out the Bridges and Tunnels business unit was working on some pilot low embodied carbon concrete at Randall's Island at the RFK Bridge. That is the RFK Bridge, right? I think Randall's, okay, so, and they were actually, they gave us a little bit of a presentation on it. It was actually a group effort between the contractor, the consultant, and the team at Bridges and Tunnels. And what they were doing is they weren't using it for roadbed just yet. They were actually experimenting with certain mix designs for pedestrian ramps, which I think was a little safer. But what they told me was the biggest challenge was, as you change the mixes, you may actually also need to change the curing time. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges. I think when I think of MTA construction projects, we don't have time for anything, right? We have to get things moving quickly. So, if a normal curing time might be 28 days, but if you're using a different mix, which is a bit more sustainable, but that might be 56 days. So you're doubling do you have the time to phase that into your project? So I think that's a really, really big challenge, I think, going through this. And, the other challenge is, converting our normal specification or project requirement and including the requirements from the Office of General Services, and then the options. How can you how can you give contractors some options to be more sustainable?
One of the things I hear a lot is how this is an industry effort. It requires everyone. So, beyond agencies, beyond engineers, but the researchers, how we can develop mixed designs that, maybe there's a way to reduce that cure time and how we can really optimize that mix. And even considering updating specifications too, Rich, if there's any challenges that, you've faced and how you overcame that would be great.
Yeah, we've been trying to update our two main material specifications for like the last 5 years for both asphalt and concrete. And we started down this road with R&D on asphalt, and we more or less independently came up with the balanced mix design method that the state was doing. So we're doing some pilots based on that, which will allow us to make better asphalt, but also more sustainable asphalt. That's kind of a fun combination. And then working with the Port Authority, I don't need to reinvent the wheel. They made awesome concrete specifications. We should just do that, right? But still have to try and get approval from the state DOT for that, which is awkward because sometimes other agencies have to be drug along into the 20th century with what we want to do with performance-based specifications. So there's also to piggyback on what Thomas was saying with the EC3 people. They are surprisingly helpful. If there's vendors out here that make things, please get your stuff in the EC3 database. And the building transparency folks are remarkably helpful. They have built-in little dashboards and toolboards that make it very easy for owners like us to do one-click reporting for my EO and one-click reporting for his EO. And if your products are in there, that will make it easier for all of our vendors and our contractors to select your products and make sure that you're getting all the credit for the great things you're doing.
That's such a great point about building transparency, helping to collect data on these environmental product declarations and really understand the footprint associated with producing these materials. And Miriam, maybe we can just have a final comment on Port Authority's Envision documentation tracker and how it ties to EC3 or anything similar. Yeah.
Well, I did want to mention our clean construction clauses. We have 3 clauses that we use to document, it's to document incoming materials, outgoing materials, as well as diesel emissions. These clauses include an electronic data deliverable. It doesn't sound that complicated. It's just we're asking the contractors to provide information to us digitally, and then this digital information is put into a database so that we can report on it. But this allows us to find out what materials are coming to our projects, what their composition is. So what is the concrete mix? What is the asphalt mix? Then we're able to calculate what the embodied carbon impacts are, and then we're able to report on it. So we know for all the materials that come to our site and leave our site, what is the embodied carbon impact, as well as potentially other key performance indicators, and for diesel emissions. So I think this has made our tracking and reporting much easier to have that as a submittal that's required from our contractors.
Absolutely, yeah. Enforcing that as a requirement is huge to be able to collect that data. And just to kind of open the floor to any other open-ended thoughts or comments on maybe how we can move forward.
Well, I think in addition to the industry, in addition to practitioners, there's also academia, and we're working with some professors from Columbia University, Rutgers University. Just so happened to be the place I graduated from, Rutgers, and the place I teach at now, Columbia. That was just a coincidence. But we're actually trying to learn. By the way, so I learned. I haven't been in school in 40 years or so. Get the young kids to understand the chemical reactions and all the stuff, the science stuff, because after a while that stuff gets buried in the back of your head, and unless you really want to start bringing out the engineering books. But the young kids are coming right out of school, so I actually had one of my entry-level engineers actually understand this stuff, so to explain it to me better. I'm a chemical engineer, but I've also actually been an environmental engineer my whole career, doing sustainable things. So going back to the baseline, what I'm hoping is, creating the baseline for 2022, and then we'll do the same thing. Once the EC3 is up and running, and we're beta testing it right now, we'll actually go back to our contracts, get another baseline for 2023, and then, and again, the first specification we looked at was the Port Authority's concrete spec, and have basically taken what's in there and put it in our spec. So that's going to be starting in our contracts in 2024. So the new concrete spec and concrete requirements for our design build, we use what's called the PRDC, project requirement design criteria. We still do design, bid, build, but we'll have basically a new concrete specification starting 2024. And then, as we start, looking at, collecting data, see where we're at. Are we actually beginning to bring the carbon? It's basically a carbon footprint of material that going down. I think, you mentioned asphalt. That's one that's coming. Steel, glass. It actually is all material. Every material, this table, this chair, everything has an embodied carbon. It's actually the carbon footprint. How do you make it? So I think the next thing in sustainability is looking at the materials. I mean, you want to build, say, wind farms, whatever, but if this takes so much carbon to build the wind farms, you're actually, sort of, defeating the purpose in some cases. So you have to look at the entire life cycle. You have to look at the entire holistically view, and then, and tread, carefully, scientifically, and practically, but also ensure sustainability.
And I totally agree that I'm thinking about what Rich said too, is the holistic approach of in the beginning of the planning stage, how are we considering this? And thinking about what Miriam mentioned, how are we quantifying this? And this is, a newer concept where we're working to standardize the methodologies, how we calculate this and compare apples to apples. And so as we're learning this, understanding best practices and teaching everyone around us what they could implement that might be successful on their projects as well. It's really important. So I want to thank everyone so much for your time with this panel and really appreciate the audience joining us today. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to come meet us afterwards. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.